Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Shake and Bake F1 podcast. I am one of your hosts, Adrian Huff, and I will be joined by my Canadian co-host, RJ McCullough, intermittently throughout this episode because our schedules, once again, just a little bit wacky this week. Of course, me and RJ do the show completely solo, just the two of us. We both work full-time. We also, have lives and hobbies outside of the show as well. So sometimes it's hard to get together every single week and carve out some time for recording, editing, clips, all that stuff. So we're doing our best to bring you guys an episode. If you watched last week, you know that RJ sort of took the reins on everything. And unfortunately, this episode for this week, we weren't able to sort of lock times. And yeah, so we're going to sort of be co-hosting this separately. Sounds like a divorced parents type situation, but it's not, I promise. Okay. The reason why our schedules have been a little bit wacky is because I am, aside from, if you've listened to the show for a long time, you might know that I enjoy photography, I enjoy editing, aside from F1, but I also enjoy acting. So I've been doing a community theater production near where I live, sort of near one of the bigger college campuses in Georgia. That's all I'm going to say. I don't want to give too much information away because I will dox myself. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of time consumed. It's been very time consuming is what I meant to say. So it's sort of taken away a lot of my free time that I've been able to devote to this show for the past 2 years. So I just had to sort of not step away, just sort of take a step back, I guess. And yeah, but thankfully we had an off week during one of the more recent weekends, and we are just coming off of Japan, and we're going to be discussing that a little bit today. But first, we're going to be doing a little segment that RJ came up with. It's one of my favorite segments called Grinding My Gears. Yeah, that's right. It's where we talk about things that bother us in general, the world of F1. And for me this week, what grinded my gears the most is, I'm going to be honest, this is going to be a little bit of a left field choice, but I'm going with Williams. They started, especially last season, it felt like they just had a lot more promise. Not even as like a championship contending team, just as someone who's going to no longer maybe be a backmarker and contending for 9th, 10th place. So the fact that they have done so poorly along with Alpine, it's just been very disappointing, and especially how they've handled the situation with their cars, their lack of the chassis. It's been a real big shit show. And it's been pretty disappointing as far as seeing how they've handled the situation, even though I'm a big fan of James Vowles. And I don't really think Logan Sargent is that good of a driver. I don't even think he deserves the seat that he has, if I'm being completely honest. But I do think how he was treated in Australia specifically was a bit unfair, even though he did crash this weekend in Japan. So not good. But I'm going to quickly throw it over to RJ, because he's going to give you his grinding his gears, and then he's going to talk about a couple of other topics as well. So we'll see you.
Thank you, Adrian. Yeah, I'd say I agree with all that Williams stuff. Been a little frustrating watching them. They obviously don't have the best pace or car of any team on the grid this year, but certainly could be fighting in the midfield for at least close to points. I don't know. I'll have a little bit more on Williams in our race recap segment, but for now, just to tie up a couple loose ends, we didn't really get to record last week. Kind of running on fumes right now, so apologies for that. Adrian's been doing his show, and I was on a little bit of a vacation. I went to visit my girlfriend's family in beautiful British Columbia. Really, really enjoyed it. They're absolutely beautiful, beautiful place. The only thing I would say as a negative, I thought it was overblown that there's this talk that people from Vancouver, and I know this is kind of inside baseball for Canadians, but there's this talk that people from Vancouver hate people from Toronto. Now, I thought that was a little bit overblown, but I I don't know. I got to say that stands the test because not only people put their noses up when you say you're from Toronto, they also always bring up the Maple Leafs and the Maple Leafs never win anything. What I have to say to that is, for any of you people listening from Vancouver, as far as I know, the Vancouver Canucks have literally never won anything. Not one Stanley Cup. And they've twice burned down their city when they've lost in the Stanley Cup final. Yes, I know the Leafs haven't won in a long time, but kind of pot calling the kettle black there. I'll move right off the Vancouver topic and move right into my grinding my gears. Now, this is another thing in my personal life, not F1 related. Adrian did the F1 related. I'm going to skew off of F1. I'm going to a wedding this weekend. Now, for those that know me and what I've done previously, I'm a big golf fan. Big golf fan. And this is Masters weekend. This is my favorite golf weekend, absolutely. Right up there with the Ryder Cup. I'd even put the Masters slightly ahead because it happens every year. And this Sunday, I have to go to a wedding. Now, I'm happy to go to the wedding. I like weddings. As cheesy as it sounds, I love love. Criticize me if you want, whatever. I love love. And I love going to weddings. I'll just leave it at that. I love going to weddings. But who the fuck plans a wedding on Masters Sunday? Obviously, people that don't like golf. But I mean, just have a little consideration for not even people that don't even like sports, like Masters Sunday. It is one of the best days of the year. Definitely top 3-4 sports days of the year. Probably top 10 day of the year. It's kind of like the Super Bowl. People that don't even like sports watch the Super Bowl. People that don't even like sports watch the Masters on Masters Sunday. So I hope that I'm not the only one with this opinion. If my girlfriend is listening to this, sorry, Caitlin, because I know she's upset with me for bringing up the fact that it's the same day as Masters Sunday. So apologies for that, Caitlin. But yeah, I hope other people are of the same opinion, because I might have to sneak a few looks at my phone if the leaderboard is close coming down the stretch on Sunday. And I hope there's a group of people that are in the same boat so that I'm not single come Monday. Let's put it that way. So that's my grind, my gears. Who plans a wedding for Masters Sunday? Moving off of that, back into some F1 talk. Let's check this off here. Moving into some F1 talk. I am obviously the Mercedes fan of this podcast. I know we've in the past kind of played up our hatred for my hatred for Red Bull, which is well and good. That's strong hatred. But Adrian has admitted that in the past he's kind of played up his hatred for Mercedes, but that this year that hatred is real. And I can see that, because they, even as a fan of the team, they're pissing me off. I'm quite frankly ready for Lewis Hamilton to be gone to Ferrari. Even Toto Wolff is pissing me off, but there's two specific things that annoy me. One's with the media and one is with social media. First, the social media. Let me pull this two posts that, quite frankly, and these are posts by Mercedes AMG Petronas F1 team's official account. The first one is a meme with a little winky face saying, "If you don't love me at my," and George Russell's car this year, "then you don't deserve me at my," and it's Lewis Hamilton's car from, I believe, 2020. You're going to tell fans of a team not to be upset that their team has dropped off the face of the earth? They are going to find out real quick next year how many people were fans of Lewis Hamilton, not fans of Mercedes. So that pissed me off. And it's almost like an extended grind my gears. The other one that pissed me off, again, official Mercedes AMG Petronas F1 account. Lap 14 to 53, Lewis and George switched positions. Lewis Hamilton is struggling with his set of tires. George Russell has stronger pace at this stage of the race on his hards. Someone responds to that, "I hate your decisions." And the Mercedes official account replies, "Lewis suggested it," with an upside down smiley face. Did Lewis kindly suggest that they, or say, should I let George through? Yeah, he did. But again, to kind of mock your fan base, especially when it comes to Lewis Hamilton, when I would argue conservatively 80% of the fan base are Lewis Hamilton fans over Mercedes fans, myself included. You are playing with fire. Playing with fire. And this is just the beginning. I don't have pulled up all the examples of it, but their social media account, ever since Lewis made his announcement, has just been towing the line, making a lot of posts that are clearly favoring George Russell. And I get it. George Russell is their future and their present. But not really a team that's in any position to be being cheeky or mocking their fan base or throwing shots at their fan base or throwing shots at Lewis Hamilton. This is just not. This does not fly. I will not accept this. All right. Now the other thing with Mercedes, Lewis's post race walkout from his presser. Now, this has nothing to do with Mercedes. This has to do with the media. But I want to explain this for a second because there's headlines going around. Lewis snaps. Lewis walks out. Lewis freaks out. Blah 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 blah. So obviously, Ferrari is doing much better than Mercedes this year, including this weekend. Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc finished 3rd and 4th on Sunday, and the reporter asked Lewis in his post-race interview if he was jealous of the race pace that Ferrari had, to which Lewis responded, "Do you have any better questions?" The reporter apologized, but Hamilton walked away before another question could be asked, while his press officer simply said, "Thank you." Now, in a separate interview, and this goes back to the Mercedes tweet about it being Lewis's decision. In a separate interview, Hamilton said his car had suffered damage after the restart following contact with Leclerc. He explained, "The car is never what I hoped it would be. It's never what we hoped it would be. Got some damage in the first stint of the restart with Charles, and I had massive understeer, like huge understeer. So that's why I decided to let George go by, because he seemed quicker and I just couldn't turn the car. It took us 2 stints to finally dial more and more wing to make it up for that loss. Last stint, I was better, but it was too late. I had 10 seconds to regain." So although Toto praised Lewis for this selfless move, it seems to be this kind of prevailing opinion that George is washing Lewis, and I won't stand for that on this podcast. I will not stand for that one bit. I have one more thing in a little bit when we get to the Japanese GP talking points, but for now, that's all I have on Mercedes. They're bad. The media, the way they're handling them. Now, should Lewis have walked out just based on this question alone? No, but it's every weekend he's just getting asked about the same thing over and over and over and over again, and people are just trying to get a rise out of him. So good. I would just say credit to Lewis for handling it the way he did, because he could have snapped, he could have freaked out, he could have said, "I've had enough of this shit." Quite frankly, he could have said, "Yeah, I am jealous. I want that pace." But obviously, he's a team player. He wants Mercedes to do well, and he's committed to that happening. So good for him for handling it well, and poo-poo on Mercedes' social media team. Now, another segment. Did you know? Okay. This segment is Did You Know? Do you mind? And then throw back to Adrian. One of these hot lights are getting sweaty. Did you know? Now, with today being the eclipse, obviously when you're listening to this, it'll be at least yesterday. But with it being the eclipse, and as I will go into later, there's a book I'm reading called The 3-Body Problem. I am going to, again, stray away from F1, and I'm going to ask these people that are listening, do you know about the Fermi paradox? The Fermi paradox, something that I got very interested, well, not very interested, but something that kind of caught my attention that I was interested in based on this book that I'm reading that is now a Netflix series. So I've been watching the Netflix series because I read the book, and I'm about to read the next book. But the Fermi paradox is essentially about the absence of clear evidence of extraterrestrial life. I'm going to give kind of the dot points from the Wikipedia, and then I'm going to go back and give it in layman's terms. So, there are billions of stars in the Milky Way that are similar to the Sun. With high probability, some of these stars have Earth-like planets in the circumstellar habitable zone. Many of these stars, and hence their planets, are much older than the Sun. If Earth-like planets are typical, some may have developed intelligent life long ago. Some of these civilizations may have developed interstellar travel, a step humans are investigating. Since many of the Sun-like stars are billions of years older than the Sun, the Earth should have already been visited by extraterrestrial civilizations, or at least their probes However, there is no convincing evidence that this has happened. And if you look at the progress that humans on Earth have made over the last 50, 100, 200, 1,000, 2,000 years, the exponential growth that we've had, if another planet that had the same formation, if they had just been around longer, if let's say 1,000 years longer, imagine how far we're going to be in 1,000 years. Imagine 10,000 years. So it stands to reason that one of these life forces would have visited Earth, but there's no real scientific evidence of that. Now, it's called the Fermi paradox because Italian-American physicist Enrico Fermi's name is associated with the paradox because of a casual conversation with fellow physicists. While walking to lunch, the men discussed UFO reports and the possibility of faster than light travel. The conversation moved on to other topics until Fermi blurted out, "But where is everybody?" So essentially, there's so much evidence that should be creating all these other planets similar to Earth. They've been around a lot longer, so they should have been able to contact or visit Earth. But where is everybody? A little out there for an F1 podcast, but you know what? It was interesting to me. I hope it's interesting to a couple people out there. If not, that's okay. You probably already hit the skip ahead button. Anyways, so I'm going to throw it back to Adrian for some driver market discussion. First, his Did You Know, then some driver market discussion. Then I will be back with some Japanese GP talking pointos.
Welcome back. So I'm going to be discussing a little bit about the driver market. Some of the two top teams could potentially both have a seat open at the end of this year. First, I'm going to discuss Mercedes. Obviously, Lewis Hamilton is leaving the team at the end of this season. Thank God. That's more of a personal note, but thank God. Cannot wait for him to get out of the clutches of that dumpster fire of a team. I mean, I know there's a lot of Mercedes fans out there that are probably going to be pissed by that, but I feel like the way that they've treated Lewis and the way that they've handled just everything the last 2 or 3 seasons has really just been embarrassing, especially considering the legacy that they had up until 2022, that the new regulation era, I guess. But yes, there will be a free seat, and sort of the popular take is that Kimi Antonelli is going to take over that seat. He's going to be, I believe, 17 by the time next season starts, and he's currently driving in Formula 2, although he's not been doing super stellar. Although I think a lot of that has to do with the car that he's driving, but a lot of things have been alluded to the fact that Kimi is going to take over the seat. While I do think it's a possibility, I don't think it's super, super likely. I think Mercedes are more than likely going to sign like a 1 to 2 year deal with like a much bigger name. I think Fernando Alonso is a possibility, even though Fernando did joke about how it would be a downgrade to go to Mercedes if he left Aston Martin right now, which he's not lying. The gap to Red Bull is just so big. It makes you think that everybody else is just right along the same levels when that's not true at all. If you take out Red Bull, Ferrari's the hottest team on the market right now, for sure, as far as performance goes. Then McLaren, then probably Aston Martin and Mercedes, all the way at the bottom of those top 5 teams. So it's been a little bit embarrassing. I know George Russell, maybe he's the bad luck charm for all of this, but things have just been going downhill since he joined the team. Fairly not to George's fault, but it's just been, like I said, a total disaster. So Carlos Sainz is also an option for Mercedes. While it's not my personal choice where I want him to go, I do want Carlos to get in a secure seat. I don't want him to go to a team like Sauber or like a backmarker team. He so deserves a team like Red Bull or even Mercedes, sadly. And I would even take Aston Martin. I just want him in a good team, like that gives him the tools to at least be able to fight for points and podiums and positions like that. Because, I mean, he has been the rock star Ferrari, the only driver that is a non-Red Bull driver to win a race in the last 18 months. And he's also being treated very unfairly. So that's sadly just how the world of Formula One works, unfortunately. But the other top team that could potentially have a free seat is Red Bull. Of course, Sergio Perez is only contracted. He only is signed through the end of this season, the 2024 season. So, my personal pick, drop Checo and bring in Carlos. Let him return to his roots at Red Bull and give him a secure seat. And a Max and Carlos team duo is extremely exciting to me. It's an amazing prospect. I know some people have thought that Fernando Alonso should be replacing Sergio. I just don't see that happening. It just seems like too volatile of a relationship, maybe, even though Fernando and Max do seem to get along very well. Those personalities on track, I feel like, would just be absolutely ridiculous, even though I wouldn't personally be too against it. But I do really, as bad as it sounds, I do want Checo gone. It sucks, but I think his time at Red Bull has come to a close. I don't necessarily think he needs to leave the sport. Even though he did do very well in Japan, relatively speaking, he's just a little uninspiring to me, and I'm so sick of Max having just zero competition amongst Red Bull. So you need somebody, even if it's just in qualifying, if Checo had started P1 and Max had started P2 on Sunday, probably would have been a much more entertaining race, at least for the first couple of laps, because when Max just always takes off at the beginning, it does lead for a big lack of excitement in the races. So yeah, comment what you think below. Where do you think Carlos is going to end up? Who do you think is going to replace Lewis at Mercedes? And is Checo going to get signed to an extension? Because Perez did say that he does expect a decision regarding his contract in the next month or so. So I know he's sort of looking for a 2-year deal, but Helmut Marko has kind of alluded to the fact that they don't want to give him sort of the weight off the shoulders and the relief of having a 2-year contract, because they don't want him to get comfortable, because when they did that last, he had that huge stinker of a streak where he just couldn't even get out of Q1 for some of the weekends, which is just absolutely abysmal. So another reason why I do think his time at Red Bull needs to come to a close. But I also think it is a possibility that Red Bull could extend him one more year, maybe just to sort out Daniel Ricciardo, Liam Lawson, Yuki Tsunoda, sort of get that situated, then maybe figure out who they want to bring in for the long term alongside Max to sort of carry out these new regulations. So again, I hope it's Carlos, but I could see them extending Perez through 2025 until the start of the 2026 season. But again, let us know in the comments below. And I'm going to, once again, throw it back to RJ, and he is going to give you some talking points from the Japanese G.
Thank you very much, Adrian. I will quickly point out, you did not do your Did You Know? So you owe us a Did You Know. I also would like to quickly say, those that are just listening on podcast app, please check us out on YouTube. It's a much more immersive experience, I'll say. We're sharing our screens. You get to look at our beautiful faces and see our graphics. And a lot of times we'll be throwing stuff up on the screen so you can get a better understanding of what we're talking about. Like last week, I made a little rant about the penalty that Alonso got, and I showed examples on the screen of some stuff that I thought made it a little bit ridiculous regarding George and Fernando. So yeah, just a reminder, please check us out on YouTube at Shake and Bake F1 Podcast. One more name I'd like to throw in the Mercedes mix before I move on to the Japanese GP. Before I move that onto that, I'd like to throw Sebastian Vettel in the mix. I know it's not likely, but I know that's the one I know. The guy I know that Lewis has discussed wanting to replace him there, and that's pretty much about the only thing that could keep me. I mean, I'm still going to switch to being a Ferrari fan next year, regardless, but that's pretty much the only thing that can keep me keep Mercedes in my good books, is if they put Sebastian Vettel in that seat. I know that I don't know. I do think that Toto wants to put Antonelli in there because he doesn't want to lose him like he lost Max back in the day. So that seems to be the prevailing opinion. I don't know though. It's still very much up in the air. Toto has said he's narrowed it down to 3 names, but he won't give those names. So I don't know. Time will tell. We shouldn't have to wait too much longer. Checo has said he expects Red Bull to make a decision within a month, and I think that within a month about his contract. So I think that'll be sort of the first domino to fall, and then we'll see Mercedes make their announcement shortly after that. Hey, who knows? Maybe Perez goes from Red Bull to Mercedes. Definitely would not like that to happen, but whatever. Not my decision. Now going to the Japanese GP talking points. First, I'm going to go struggles, then successes, and then just a few things that I thought were either cool or interesting. So the struggles. Obviously, Williams, as Adrian mentioned, so I won't go on it too much, but Williams just had a really rough weekend. We had Logan Sargent having a pretty scary-looking crash in FP1. He obviously walked out of it okay, and the car somehow managed to be relatively unscathed, but their car has gone through a lot. And obviously, we had Albon crashing on the first lap. Come the second half of the season, they are going to have so many grid penalties from having to replace their engines and chassis and using up their parts that they're allowed to use. So all these things are going to come back to bite them even further later into the season. Logan Sargent also I won't say crash. He kind of spun off track in the race after he was actually having a very good race. I think he was running 11th at the time, and with all the pit strategies and whatnot, was poised to get in the points, which would have been a really impressive, probably his most impressive. I'd have to look it up, but probably his most impressive race weekend as an F1 driver if he hadn't spun off track. But I will give him credit; he was able to get the car back on track. Thought there was going to be a red flag. They did a brief yellow flag, but just a virtual safety car. And he was able to maneuver his way back onto the track, which was kind of cool looking, I guess. And I don't know. I thought when he was backing on the track, I thought there was a risk that he might get smoked. But I guess that's why they put out the VSC. And he was able to finish the race. Let's see where he finished, though. He finished in 17th. Last place of the finishers, but yeah, he was looking good for a little bit there. Other struggles, Mercedes, their strategy. I'm not going to give them too much of a hard time for this because after qualifying, they were kind of in a bit of an iffy position, and you never know how the tires are going to react. There was really only one real practice session, maybe 1.5 practice sessions for each team. The weather was a lot hotter, so we thought tire degradation was going to be a lot worse during the race. They saved 2 hards. The point I'm trying to make, they saved 2 hards, and they tried to go that quick medium, which didn't really amount to anything because they had to restart, and then go hard the rest of the race. As we saw with Lewis very quickly, the tires were falling off a cliff. Lewis was getting past. He asked for them to change their strategy. They didn't change the strategy. Oh yeah, it's easy to sit here in hindsight and say, what were they doing? Why didn't they change quicker? Obviously, it's very hard to make these decisions on the fly. But, I don't know, looking back on Mercedes' history, this isn't really a new problem. I mean, they were able to win a shit ton of races back in the mid-2010s, early 2020s. But that was mainly because of the car they had. That was just, at one point, so much better than everyone's. Not quite to the extent that the Red Bull car is better now, but they were really able to, the car was able to outperform and hide some of their strategy issues. There was a lot of times when they were having race battles against guys like Vettel or even Verstappen where they messed up the strategy. And I don't know, in the moment, never really thought too much of it, but now seeing their strategy errors and them kind of bungling things in many ways this year, it's kind of given me pause on a lot of the things we thought were the strengths of them. I know there's been a bit of a brain drain with a lot of their guys that made the team successful moving on to other teams, but just all around pretty disappointing and very disappointing and lackluster performance from Mercedes this season. Another guy that struggled, obviously, Danny Ricciardo. He had a decent qualifying, but he is getting outperformed on a regular basis now by Yuki Tsunoda. And the crash on the first around just after turn 1, I'm not going to really say it was egregious or a big mistake or anything. I know he was trying to make an evasive maneuver. He looked to his left. It was just kind of it was just a racing incident. One of those things, I think, get clipped from behind. First, I thought it was Lance Stroll, but it wasn't really Danny's fault. It wasn't Albon's fault. It was just one of those things that happened. They kind of get squeezed there. Goes around that bend in turn one. You can go 3 wide, and then quickly it goes to where you can only go 2 before they do the quick S's. So yeah, not really anyone's fault, but you gotta. I mean, his start was absolutely awful. He got passed by like 4 guys, so he's already off to a bad start, and then that happened. Not great. One thing I will say though, a bit of a funny camera pan when he was in the paddock looking at the screens to see what happened, and then the camera just pans over to Liam Lawson. Yeah, kind of a funny pan over to Liam Lawson right behind him, as in this. He's on your ass. Yeah, that was funny. Little cheeky maneuver there from the broadcast, who we'll get to a second, had their mistakes. The broadcast, I think. But I'll get to that in a sec. And finally, Lance Stroll. If it wasn't for his dad, this guy would have been out of his seat last year. Seems like at one point last year, it didn't seem like he even wanted to be in the sport. His qualifying was awful. He worked his way back up at one point, but just not good. I know he had that one pole back in, I think it was Turkey or Hungary a long time ago, but he's been in F1 for long enough that he should be doing better than this. Got his way up to 12th from starting in, I don't know, like right near the back. But looking where his teammate Fernando Alonso finished 6th, just not acceptable. He's been piss poor. He's been piss poor this season, and Aston Martin is basically driving with one arm behind their back. They're having basically one driver, and that's just not acceptable in the peak of motorsports. There's only 20 guys that get to be in F1, and he's not pulling his weight. Seems it should be only a matter of time before his dad pulls the plug and probably sells his stake in Aston Martin, because it does seem like the only reason he's in this is for his son. And I don't know. Even though he's Canadian, I really don't have much love for Lance Stroll, and his performance once again has been piss poor. On to the successes, the good things from the Japan GP. Obviously, the number one is Yuki Tsunoda. I mean, just an incredible performance to get a point. I know it was only a point, but he put in a great drive. He had to kind of bounce back from some bad things. He had that one great pit stop from his team that he gave them credit for. His home race, extremely important for him to do well here, and he did. He pulled it off. He got that 10th place, so happy for Yuki. And I don't know, maybe a bit of a hot take here, but I was looking, and 6 of the last 10 races, you can make the case that he has finished number 1 in the midfield drivers. Now that's obviously if you take out the top: Red Bull, McLaren, Mercedes, Ferrari, and Aston Martin. If you take out those 10 and look at 11th, Yuki has so many 11th place finishes. So yeah, I mean, 6 of the last 10 being the number 1 midfield driver is pretty impressive. He's beaten Danny almost exclusively all season. He's beaten Danny. And the hot take that I alluded to, if Daniel Ricciardo was putting in the same drives that Yuki Tsunoda has been putting in all season, I think the talks of Danny to Red Bull would be on. I think that would be a big discussion point. But no one's discussing with Yuki. I think I'm not going to say he burned the bridge, but I think he just isn't really on their radar anymore. And it's a little bit unfair, but also that's F1. He's kind of had his chance to prove himself. Seems as though like Helmut Marko and Christian Horner aren't really looking at Yuki if they're going to replace Sergio Perez. And I'm not going to sit here and say that they necessarily should, but I do think if Danny Ricciardo is doing what Yuki Tsunoda has done so far this year, he would be on their radar. Okay, a couple more things I found interesting or funny or whatnot from the race. One was the 5-car pit lane battle. Yuki was able to pull out in front of that, but that was visually stimulating and exciting to watch 5 cars go to the pit lane and pull out of the pit lane at the same time. Lance Stroll almost getting a penalty for kind of just pulling into the middle of the train coming out of the pit lane, but avoid the penalty. It was just very interesting to watch that. We also had 4 cars within 4 seconds of each other to finish the race. That would be Fernando Alonso in 6th, George Russell in 7th, Oscar Piastri in 8th, and Lewis Hamilton in 9th. Now, unfortunately, the broadcast didn't show us this. They were too busy showing Yuki or Max or Checo's in-lap, which no one really gives a shit about an in-lap, especially when, I mean, there wasn't really any celebrating or anything going on. But, so yeah, I don't know. It's just something was happening in the control room. Someone in that control room was out of control. So they should have really shown that race. I mean, we had 44.27 seconds off, then we had 45 seconds off, then we had 47 seconds, then 48. So 4 guys in 4 seconds. And, I mean, Fernando and George, George almost caught up to Fernando. I wonder what George was thinking in that moment, because we saw what happened last week with George and Fernando. Also, shout out Fernando for a pretty good strategy move with the DRS, trying to keep George, keeping Oscar within his DRS behind him so that George couldn't get the advantage of passing and getting within his DRS. So, yeah, I thought that was a pretty interesting strategy move, kind of a playing through 40 chess move there. And it worked out. So that is that. Oh, the other successes that I forgot to mention, just to go back for a sec. Carlos Sainz just putting in work this season. Another 3rd place. I'm going to look at the driver standings here in a moment, but just fantastic. He passed Leclerc with ease. He had better pace than Charles did. I think that was just more of a car thing because he pulled away. But yeah, it was another very impressive drive from Carlos. And Alonso, now that I'm mentioning Alonso, just outperforming the car. It's probably the 5th fastest car. I'll even put it behind Mercedes. But to get 6th place there, he said it was one of his top 5 drives, but he says stuff like that all the time. But yeah, very, very impressive work from Fernando Alonso. As we've seen, he is just a legend of the sport. He's not unbeatable, which makes Lance Stroll's stuff more annoying. I mean, Ocon kind of, he benefited from some bad Alonso luck, but Ocon did okay against him, and then obviously Lewis beat him early on in Lewis's career. So he's not unbeatable, but what he's done in that Aston Martin and what he's done against Lance Stroll has been pretty impressive. Just one more point I wanted to make with the Japan GP was the turn 1 overtakes were really, really fun to watch, and they have the long straight, the DRS straight, but then guys, if they didn't get it done, then they had to decide whether to go inside or outside down around turn 1, and there was a lot of really, really cool and well executed moves down there. One turn that I don't really like, the final turn, kind of puts guys at a disadvantage when they're trying to defend there. There's not really any way to defend because guys can just kind of brake later and then take the inside. But as we saw with George, if you leave it a little bit too late and just try to send it in there, we saw George and Oscar. George just kind of pushed Oscar off track. There was nowhere for Oscar to go. Not a big fan of the chicanes or whatever you want to call it before last turns or before the final straights to end a lap. It doesn't really make for good racing. We used to see it all the time, the Spanish Grand Prix, before they changed the final turn there. But yeah, when you have those little slow bends near the end of a lap, it doesn't really bode well for good racing. But turn 1, great racing, great overtakes, all done there. If we look at the updated drivers and constructors standings, we have Max Verstappen, obviously in first place, 77 points. Sergio Perez pulls back into second place with 64 points, so 13 back of Max. Charles Leclerc third with 59, and then Carlos Sainz fourth with 55. Now keep in mind he had that race that he did not participate in. So if you give him like a third or fourth there, he is right up. Obviously in third, but maybe. I mean, you can make a good case he'd be in second. So yeah, I think he's been the second most impressive driver this season. You can't take anything away from Max. Yes, they have the best car, but he's just inevitable at this point in his career. But yeah, Carlos Sainz really, really impressive, and he's on a contract here, like they say in other sports. Like he's doesn't have a contract next year, so to be doing this under all that pressure, best season of his career, really, really impressive. There's that. Next, we got Lando Norris 5th, 37 points. And then Oscar Piastri 6th, 32 points. George Russell 7th, 24 points. Fernando Alonso tied with him at 24 points. And then Lewis Hamilton, unfortunately, in 9th place. Not a great start of the season for him. And rounding out the top 10 is Mr. Lance Stroll. If we look at the constructors' standings real quick, Red Bull first place, 141. Second place, Ferrari, 120. Still doable. I mean, only 21 points back. That's one good weekend to one bad weekend. It's definitely still doable. McLaren, 89 points in third. And then it kind of drops off the map. Mercedes, 34 points. Aston Martin in fourth. Aston Martin in fifth with 33. And then way down to sixth. Red Bull, Honda, RB, Honda, RBPT, the Visa Cash App. Just a terrible name, whatever you want to call it. They have 7 points. Haas has 4 points. And then the last three, Williams, Kick, Sauber, and Alpine, all have 0. So there's your standings. We have one last segment. I'm going to do it and then throw it to Adrian. That is... Shout out of the week or quote of the week. I have 2 quick ones. One I alluded to earlier. Check out the show on Netflix called 3 Body Problem. Stick with it. It's a little bit weird at the beginning, but once you kind of gather what's going on, near the end of the season, it gets really, really good. Read the first book. Fantastic. Going to start reading the second book. Basically, premise of it is, what if 40 years ago, the top world powers started trying to contact, let's just say, alien life. And after trying for a while, they finally did get contact. And kind of what happens after that. I'm not going to spoil anything, but very, very good sci-fi show for those that are interested in that type of thing. And my other is Curb Your Enthusiasm. They had their finale. Today's Monday. They had their finale yesterday, Sunday night. Unbelievable finale. Some, again, not going to spoil anything, but great callbacks to the Seinfeld finale, which Larry David obviously created. And just a really, really good bow wrapped on what was an incredible show. One of the funniest shows. The final episode, I was laughing out loud almost the entire time. It's just, this final season was fantastic. The final episode, in my eyes, the best one of the season. Just great parallels to the Seinfeld finale, but done much better. I don't have a problem with the Seinfeld finale personally, but a lot of people do. This was great. So do yourself a favor and watch that. You don't even have to have watched the whole season. I recommend watching the season, but you don't have to. The finale was just fantastic. So that is my shout out / quote of the week. I'm going to throw it back to Adrian one more time here.
Okay, I'm going to give you a couple of very quick thoughts about the Japanese GP, because I know RJ just covered a lot of stuff regarding the weekend and the race. But first, I'm going to give you my shout out of the week, and I should have had that prepped. Here we go. Yeah. So I've been singing this guy's praises for the last couple of weeks, and this episode, honestly. But my shout out of the week goes to Carlos Sainz. It was going to be Charles Leclerc, because he sort of took the strategy into his own hands in Japan and managed to fight for him. I believe it was P7 or P8. Maybe it was P8. P8 to P4, which is just fantastic. I mean, I love Leclerc so much, but Carlos has just been on another level of consistency. Aside from Red Bull, I would say he is at the top of his game. If he had not have missed Saudi Arabia, I do think it's a possibility that he would be past Perez. And before Japan, he could have even have been leading the championship. So shout out to Carlos Sainz. Going to give you just a couple of quick thoughts about the race. Again, Ferrari really surprisingly did a really great job, even though they did try to get Charles on a 2-stop when Leclerc just doubled down and said, nope, we're going to do the 1-stop. And of course, it worked out very well. But Carlos also had really good strategy, ended up getting a podium. And yeah, Ferrari have just been killing it. So hopefully they're able to just squeeze that gap to Red Bull just a little bit more throughout this season and give us a little bit more of entertainment, because personally, especially like Australia and a couple of moments in the last couple of weekends, have almost been more entertaining than the entire 2023 season. And I say that as a Max Verstappen fan. I want Max to fight for his wins. I think it's boring just seeing him take off at the beginning and just coast to victory. But I sound like a broken record at this point, and so many other people share that opinion. Some other thoughts. It's hugely disappointing that Daniel Ricciardo was taken out at the beginning. He's been getting a lot of flack online, and I do think some of it's warranted, but at the same time, I am disappointed because he did show a lot of promise at that Silverstone test, but his performance has just been so lacking. So hopefully the Racing Bulls can up their performance a little bit throughout this season, and Daniel can actually give us some decent performances. Very happy that Yuki was able to score a point in his home race. Again, I'm sure RJ has covered all of this. Let's see. He went over the updated drivers and constructor standings. So, yeah, I mean, I am very, very excited for China. I know some people are a little bit iffy about that track, but to me, I am very excited because we haven't been there in 5 years, I think. I think the last time we were there was in 2019. So before the pandemic, obviously. It's a very interesting track. Apparently, I didn't know this, but apparently it only sells out about a third of the available tickets every year. So it's a bit odd. I figure Formula One would be a little bit more popular there. But maybe with Zhou Guan Yu, a couple more people will show up because it is exciting to have somebody from the country racing in the race. I cannot say that from experience. I did not travel to Austin or Vegas or Miami to see Logan Sargent. I would, not to see Logan, but I would travel there. And I will one day. Okay, guys, so I'm going to throw it back to RJ to take us out.
Well, thank you very much, Adrian. Yeah, that is pretty much it for us. Overall, Japanese GP, not a bad race, not the best race, but the different strategies made it at least interesting. Next week, there's no race this weekend, but next week we're back to China, Chinese GP, first time in a couple of years. So hopefully that will provide some good racing. As Adrian mentioned, they only sell out apparently a third of their tickets. I've never seen that, but I'm going to trust Adrian on that one. That's kind of weird, but since they haven't been there in a while, hopefully the fans will be back. Please follow us on YouTube, TikTok, Twitter are the main ones. Subscribe to the podcast. Leave us some comments in the YouTube comments section. Yep, well said, RJ. And yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And as always, remember, if you're not first, you're last.